Okay, good afternoon. I'm ready to start here. And so we've got today's last day of class. And so we've got one bit of task yet to do, and that's to do the final exam. So it's going to be due on Sunday. So let me talk about what the exam is going to be about. I'll give you a pretty good indication of what's happening. So Sunday is really the last due date for this. And I know that a lot of times I can allow people to do makeups and whatnot. And I know that it's sometimes it's sort of this conflict between being able to see your open exam and whatnot and being able to be able to do a makeup. And I've long sort of leaned toward allowing students to do makeup. However, with the final exam, I've got to report grades on Monday, and probably know a little bit in the day Monday, and they really watch us and police that very strongly. So I would say any makeup opportunities will be very, very limited, unlikely, but so if you have some technical issues between now or between, I should say tomorrow, Thursday and Sunday, let me know, get with me as soon as possible so that I can try to resolve the issue. Email's fine. I'll be checking my email throughout the weekend. So it's going to be just Sunday, 4/23, 11:59 p.m. This is not different in terms of how this is structured than what we've done before. In terms of the exam itself, basically, it's going to be 50 multiple choice questions, and you're going to have more time than what you had before. So you're going to have 2 hours to work on this, and so 120 minutes. It's going to be a bright space, and it's probably going to be available tomorrow sometime. Okay. There's an outside chance it may be available yet tonight. I don't want anybody to hold me to that because I don't know for a fact that I'll be able to get it available, but I'm still making some changes to it. But it should be available. Well, it will definitely be available tomorrow, sometime during the day tomorrow. So you'll have Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday to work on it, and you've got 2 hours to do it. I think that's my experience is that tends to be ample amount of time, and it basically covers a lot of the content that we've covered before in the class. There's going to be nothing new. There's nothing that is pulled out of page 327 just out of random. At least I don't think so. I know I just was up at my office looking it over, and I don't believe there's anything that's too tricky or too obscure that we didn't actually talk about in class. I think that's really the main issue is I really don't like to put anything on any exam that's not covered in class. So I think you can probably feel pretty confident about that. One other thing about the first 4 exams, we dropped the lowest of those. So I want everybody to be aware of that. As I prepare the grades, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and zero out the lowest score. So I know what happens is sometimes people set their bright space for notifications. You can do that. You can, like, whenever an instructor makes a change, like enters a grade or something happens, you can get texted or email or whatever. So sometimes I get multiple frantic texts saying, "Hey, my grade on exam 3 is now 0. What's going on?" It's because of the fact that's what we're doing. We're dropping low scores. So that's what's happening. So don't have a fit. That's all that's happening. Even if you had hundreds on the first 4 exams, we'd still drop one of those 100 scores. So the 400 points possible in the class, the 3 of the 4 first 4 exams are the ones that count, and then the final exam is the one that there's no way around counting. Okay. All right. So questions for me about any of that? Okay. All right. Let's talk about what to expect on the exam, and some of this material we actually, well, as relates to exam first 2 exams that we talked about on Monday. Are repetitious, but we'll talk a bit about what some of these are. So let's see here. So there are a couple of questions about the circular flow model, and you want to sort of know what's going on with the circular flow. Remember, we put 3 actor groups up there on the circular flow: firms, households, and governments. And so know that what a household and both parties in the private sector are buying and selling from each other. That is, firms are buying labor, selling goods to and from households. Households are selling their labor and buying goods from firms. And so just understand there's a labor market, there's a goods market that firms are selling into and buying into as well. So those are important considerations to think about. The idea that both firms or both actors are playing different roles. Okay. We also talked about, in fact, we went over this quite a bit on Monday, this idea of the production possibilities curve. And I want to talk just a bit more about that here so that we're all familiar with what's going on. And so I'm going to try to swivel the camera here and try to get I keep left is right, right is left on this one here. It's just the opposite in another room that I've got. So I apologize for sort of being all over the place or seemingly. So When we talk about production possibilities, what are we really getting at here? We're really saying that it's a hypothetical model of production. And it can be done, it can be hypothetical at the firm level, at the industry level, or even at the national level. So we just simply simplify this by saying we've got some good A and good B. And I think we use the analogy of guns and butter, which is used very often in these particular sorts of discussions to talk about, the fact that, good guns being a euphemism for capital goods, butter being a euphemism for consumer goods. And so you get this sort of downward sloping curve. Now, the fact about this that you need to know is the fact it's downward sloping, meaning that as one thing goes up, the other thing goes down. And note too about the fact that any of these points along here are considered to be efficient, and that we would be operating at maximum capacity. Operating here is a condition of what we call inefficiency or productive inefficiency. That is not an efficient condition. Okay, so in other words, if the system, whatever the production system is, the firm, the industry, the nation can push outward, it can achieve something like full employment. But any point out here is considered unattainable, at least in the short run. And in the long run, the goal of economics in general, if you ask most economists, is non-inflationary growth over time. But we haven't talked about inflation, but it's this idea of pushing this envelope, pushing the bears back so that we have more of everything. The pie itself is bigger. And by the way, there's ample evidence for the fact that this is possible because in the US, in the last, say, 40 years or so, the US population has grown far smaller than what has the economy. So total output of goods and services is risen faster than population. So it is possible to achieve that particular outcome. Okay. All right. So just know about what's going on there. Also, there's a question about scarcity. So know what scarcity is about. So, and there are a couple of different contexts by which you want to know about scarcity. Number one, what is scarcity? It's the relative lack of a resource. And it also forms the basis for why there's economics in the first place. And then it's the idea that if there are scarce resources, then we have unlimited wants, they sort of bump up against each other. So the conflict between society's unlimited wants and the reality of scarce resources is really the heart of what's going on. Okay. There are a couple of questions about opportunity cost, and I want everybody to sort of be aware of what we're talking about with opportunity cost. So opportunity cost is simply the cost of some alternative that is not chosen. And if we were to put an actual figure on it, we would usually pick the best option that is not chosen. Right? So the example that we had the other day with the guy playing basketball as opposed to studying, that was his particular unique set of choices. He could study, he could play basketball, whichever. But to do one, you have to give up some of the value of the other. And both have value, presumably, or you wouldn't do either one of them. But you've got to kind of choose, and so your time is limited. So we talk about opportunity cost, it's simply the value of something that's foregone. Now, when it applies in a business firm context, which is where we sort of took this and sort of ran with it a little bit further, we call opportunity costs implicit costs. It's one and the same thing. What they are is they're simply the cost of the next best alternative that a producer could be doing that is not. So you could be producing shampoo and conditioner, maybe decide to stop making conditioner. You have to factor in the value of what you gave up by no longer producing conditioner, that sort of thing. So you have to sort of understand what we're giving up, and also what is not relevant, what is not given up. And there are things that you're going to incur regardless of what you do. So things like taxes, you're not going to avoid taxes, you're not going to avoid sales taxes. All those things are going to be always going to be there. Okay. All right. Also know about this idea of, when we talked about consumption, I think this is back in chapter 6. We talked about consumption and the value of consuming goods is the term that we call utility. Just so understand that the term utility, as it applies to the consumer context, deals with the satisfaction or benefit that somebody gets from consuming a good, which is why we decide to purchase goods. And notice that obviously there's a different means of describing utility on the production side when we talk about electric utilities, but there is a question or two dealing with electric utilities, but it'll be an obvious distinction. It won't be just like that. Okay. So it's this idea that we get utility from consuming goods, and we also get a diminishing marginal utility. Now, this was the very first of the functions that we described as being diminishing in nature. Okay, diminishing functions. That is, it has a downward slope because we get less and less incremental benefit, which is what the term marginal really means, as we consume more goods. And so the second cup of coffee of the day is not as satisfying as the first. The third is not as satisfying as the second, etc. And that's a sort of it's sort of maybe a little bit overly simplistic example, but it's one that's been used for a long time in a lot of different contexts. But even in the broader realm of the entire economy, as a good becomes less scarce, we tend to value it less. If something's not scarce, we tend not to put very much value at all, and so there is no economic value. Something like breathing air, unless air becomes scarce, and then that's certainly an issue. Okay. All right. Let me see here. There are a couple of questions about the general configuration of demand and supply. Okay. So just know that supply is upward sloping, demand is downward sloping. Again, you can use that mnemonic device that I repeated on Monday. Demand D, demand down, downward sloping curve. Supply to the sky being an upward sloping curve, and intersect and opposite slopes. And then note too, there's a question about equilibrium. What is equilibrium? It's the meeting point between those, and it's got two manifestations: equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price. From a quantity standpoint, what is the key thing to know about equilibrium is the fact that it's the point at which the quantity demand equals the quantity supply. Quantity demand equals the quantity supply. That's an equilibrium point. And because that's a point of stability, you tend to have a stable price and quantity for that matter. In the short run, however long that short run period might be, and it's not particularly well defined because it's a case-by-case basis, and we have markets that move from one equilibrium level to another from time to time. And we were in sort of an equilibrium in oil for a few months there. We had the oil prices were fairly stable. We call range bound. The price was somewhere between 75 or 70 and 75. And then they just took a bit of a bump upward. That's why we're seeing gas prices take a bit of a tick upward in the last week or so. And that's a market that is very unstable in terms of equilibrium. But the thing is that most markets will settle into some equilibrium over time, just as sort of the behavior of how they work. Okay. Okay. Let me see here. You also want, there's a question that deals with demand schedule. Now, this is in the book. They'll refer to a table that lists price, quantity, sold as a schedule. All that is just simply a listing. I wouldn't be worried about the term schedule. All it is simply laying out the price and quantity in sort of a tabular form or spreadsheet form, whichever you prefer. And all it's really illustrating is the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. That's all that's really being asked for there. So the demand schedule for goods simply lays out those prices, and the idea that people will buy various different quantities at different prices is really the illustration of how demand works. And that some people will buy more at lower prices and fewer people will buy more at higher prices. That's simply the way the demand function tends to work out. Okay. All right. Okay. There's a question about shifts in demand or supply. So you want to know about shifts. And we talked a bit about this on Monday once again. And but the issue of or shift in supply is where the entire curve moves to the right or to the left. And again, I know I've been harping since day one on the idea of thinking about demand and supply and those shifts as being right, left, as opposed to up, down, even though they do represent increase, decrease. But I think it's easier to visualize if you think of the number line and think about a movement to the right as being an increase, whatever the function is, supply or demand, and to the left is back toward the origin as a decrease. So if you're talking about a movement from one point to the other, it's basically because of a shift in something. And the shifts are due to what we call non-price variables. Shifts in supply and shifts in demand are non-price variable, or due to non-price variables. So it's not the price of the good that causes the shift. A change in the price of the good will cause a movement up and down, up or down along those supply or demand curves, whichever is relevant. And usually those movements along those curves are due to something that is resulting from a shift on the other side of the market, typically. Or it could be due to government action, and we'll get to a couple questions dealing with that here in a second. But understand the difference between shifts in demand and supply and movements along those curves. Okay. All right. And you can stop me anytime. We're small enough group. In fact, I think we've got very few people, I think, on our Zoom call right now. So that's fine. I don't blame you for wanting to look at the video. That's probably just as well. Okay, let me see here. I just covered that one. Okay, you want to know about elasticity. Now, when we talk about elasticity, what are we saying here? We're saying, and there's the only question on the exam about elasticity deals with demand, the elasticity of demand. And we said that the price elasticity of demand is computed as being the percentage change in the quantity demanded of the good divided by the percentage change in price. And we take the absolute value of that entire expression on that right side of the equation, because we don't care if it's positive or negative. It's going to be negative, but because the price and quantity move inversely, that's why it's a downward sloping curve. But it's the relationship between whatever that ratio is and the value of 1. So if it's less than 1, it's inelastic. So if it's less than 1, so 0 to 1, it's inelastic, meaning that the demand side is not particularly moved by a change in price up or down into 1. So goods that have demand that's inelastic, if the price changes a lot, the quantity demand won't change very much. And these are goods that are considered to be necessities or very inexpensive, or we wouldn't mind the price change, or are goods that are absolutely critical. Okay? Elastic goods are those which are above 1, and where the quantity demand is much more responsive or sensitive to the change in the price. Or if the price changes a little bit, people run out the door. Now remember, in perfect competition, we have a perfectly elastic, that is flat demand curve. The fact that buyers are completely indifferent to who the seller is, and they'll buy from whoever the lowest price is, even if it's a little bit. And by the way, when you talk about, I just mentioned gasoline, retail gasoline is probably the most price elastic good that I can think of. Even this idea that if we're driving down the street, we see gasoline for $3.49 on the right side and $3.48 on the left side of the street. We'll do a U-turn, cross traffic, to get that 1 penny per dollar. We'll do it. People do it. And this is why these gas stations watch each other all day long. And if a price changes, they'll be calling somewhere, wherever they need to call, and say, can we change the price? Because it's going to affect the business. So elastic versus inelastic are important things to know about. Okay. Okay, let me see here. So, okay. Let me see here. So there are actually a few. I said the only question. There are a few questions. They're all dealing with this thing that I just talked about: price elasticity of demand, and the idea. There are a number of different scenarios here presented, and so like one is a life-saving drug, for instance. So if there's a life-saving drug, well, what are you going to? Is the demand going to be price elastic or inelastic? It's going to be inelastic. People are going to pay whatever price they have to pay. Remember that this is not a mystery to the supply side. You remember about 3 or 4 years ago, whatever it was, that the maker of the anti-phylactic drug, what is it called? Where you been stung by a bee, and what's it called? I forget the name of the drug, but there was most companies don't make it, so he raised the price a couple thousand% or some gigantic percent, and as a result, people were up in arms about it because you had to have that. I mean, if you were stung by a bee and you're subject to this anaphylaxis, you could easily die, and probably will. And so that was EpiPen. That's what it was. So that was an example of that as a life-saving drug. So there is definitely a reason why we describe it that way. Okay. All right. So you want to know about this idea of marginal utility as being downward sloping, and the fact it's a diminishing function. There are a number of functions in economics. We also talked about diminishing marginal product as another function. But that is the issue when it comes to utility. It tends to decrease over time as the market becomes saturated, and the good becomes less scarce. Okay. Okay, and then this is something that we talked a bit about on Monday, and let's talk a bit about it again, just because I think it's important to go over. And that's the idea of what is the rational consumer trying to do with his or her choices, and it's got to do with what we call utility maximizing choices. And we have to take marginal utility at a particular level of consumption for one good in relation to another good. And so if you've got two goods, good A and good B, issue is that we're trying, even though they might have different prices, we're trying to consume levels at which the marginal price to marginal utility to price ratio for really all goods in what is called the consumption bundle are equivalent on and on and on. And it's obviously a theoretical and sort of an idealized view of how marginal utility works. But I think we all understand that sometimes we'll look at the price, we'll look at something in the store and say, wow, I really like that. And as a result, but then we look at the price and say, I don't like that. In other words, marginal utility was high, but so was the price. And so that fraction is much less lower than what we thought it was going to be. If the price was very low and the marginal utility was high, that's a great deal. That's a very good deal. So we won't want to buy it. By the way, if anybody has kids, they're completely insensitive to price. And so they'll look at marginal utility only. Say, well, you buy me this, and you look at the price and think, no, maybe I won't, because of the fact that there's got to be sensitivity to price, but it's price to marginal utility, and it's that ratio that is computed. So I think that's an important consideration that I think is not always understood by people. So note too about what causes these shifts in aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So I'm sorry, demand and supply. So when we talk about shifts in demand, shifts in supply, what are we talking about? So when we talked about demand shifts, we said one of the key ones was changes in tastes and preferences of buyers. That is, buyers may shift the demand curve to the left because they no longer like the particular good. It could also be maybe in combination with the fact that they no longer like it and the fact that there's a substitution effect is a big one. I don't want to buy a cassette tape because I can buy a DVD player. I don't want to buy a DVD player because I can listen to MP3. So you get the idea. Goods come along, they replace other goods over time. And so as a result, goods that become substitutes for others push other goods out of the situation. Okay. And also things like income effect. Income does shift demand as incomes rise. Demand for normal goods will rise as incomes fall. Demand for normal goods falls, and it's just the opposite with inferior goods. Okay. On supply, the big one with supply is this idea of the cost of production. That's far and away the biggest determinant of supply is the cost of production. And if costs are going up, supply tends to shift left based on the general idea that if it costs more to do something, you'll do less of it, maybe do something more of something else. Costs go down, you'll do more of it. Okay. So that kind of gives you a bit of an idea as to what is going on with that. Okay. Let me see here. Okay, so we want to talk a bit about cost here. And so remember that we had a number of different costs that you want to be familiar with. And these go back to a very important chapter that I said was sort of the lead-in chapter to where a lot of this is going in terms of what we call market structure. Okay. And I gave you in class, whenever it was, we talked about this, some listing of some of the terms or some of the values that you want to compute. Remember, we have three kinds of values in economics: totals, marginals, and averages. But you want to know about, first of all, you want to know about total cost, which is basically this question of price times quantity, right? I'm sorry, total cost is fixed cost plus variable cost. That's what's going on there. Total revenue is price times quantity. There you go. So sorry about price times quantity. But then we get into, that's about it for revenue. I mean, there's not much. I mean, yes, we get into marginal revenue, the change in total revenue divided by the change in quantity or total product, whichever you prefer. We simply said they were the same thing. But then we get into things like average total cost. Okay? Average total cost is simply the cost per, taking all the costs, total costs, divided by the level of output. And that tells us the cost per unit at whatever the level of output is. It tells us what did it cost to make this single unit of an output. It could be you only produce 3 units of a good per year. Maybe you only produce 3 aircraft per year, or ships, or submarines, or whatever. Nonetheless, it still gives you an idea of the average cost. Okay. So, and then we have average fixed cost. Fixed cost, simply fixed cost over total quantity, and then average variable cost is variable cost over quantity. So I think if you understand what's being asked for here, it's not really so much a question of memorization. I know that sometimes people say, do we have to memorize these? Well, first of all, you don't, because this is an online exam, and it's open book, obviously, and you can use whatever resources you like. So no, I guess the answer is no, you don't have to memorize it. But secondly, and probably more importantly, and I really mean this, is the idea that if you just simply think about what is being asked for here, it comes down to not really being a question of having to memorize it. What is average variable cost? It's all variable costs per unit, and so as a result, that's what we're being asked for there. It's important to also know about marginal cost, which goes like this. It's the change in total cost divided by the change in quantity. Okay, and there's a question dealing with the profit maximizing quantity. So remember, when we talk about this quantity that maximizes profit, we're saying it's the point at which marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And it's for all firms in all industries. It's the profit maximizing quantity. So just be aware of that. And it's often the case that a firm is not operating where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And it becomes more challenging, obviously, in a firm or an industry, I should say, in which there's quite a lot of variability in terms of price, and the price which affects marginal revenue. So I think that those are all things to be thinking about here. Okay. All right. So those are some computations. This is not going to be a big math piece, really. It's not really about the math and introductory micro course. It's more about the concept. It's more about what is being asked for in terms of the content. But because of the fact that this is a quantitative science, and so it's almost impossible not to get into some of the math, but we do try to make it more apprehendable, just because it's more about the concepts than it is the math. It really is. Okay. Okay, let's see, where will we? What's that? Just 1 second. Okay. Let's see, I skipped that one. Okay. So know about what these costs represent. So when we talk about fixed costs, what are we talking about? We're talking about fixed costs. We're talking about things. Well, first of all, what is a fixed cost? It's a cost that does not vary with the level of output. So it's going to remain constant, even if the firm shuts down for 6 months or whatever. It's going to go on and on. Things like rent, lease expense on the equipment, salaries, presumably 6 months may be a long time, but insurance, those kind of things. Those are costs that go on, and they're not related to production, at least in the short run. Now, in the long run, we say all costs are variable, but in the short run, it is possible to know that there are some costs that are fixed. Variable costs, however, do vary with output. They go up and down with the level of output, including labor costs. Okay, so those are in fact variable. Okay. All right. Let me see here. What's next on our list? Okay, you'll be asked in a couple of instances to compute a profit. Okay, and remember what profit is. Profit is simply total revenue minus total cost. Total revenue minus total cost is profit. And there are two kinds of profit that we're interested in economics, and they are accounting profit, economic profit. So profit equals total revenue minus total cost. When we talk about accounting profit, the only cost is the explicit or accounting costs. Economic profit includes another layer of cost, which is implicit costs or opportunity costs, which I mentioned a second ago. So that is, and so that's what you want to know about. And economic profit is what economists tend to be more interested in, because it's reflective of the idea that some things are given up. Okay, so basically, just know how to compute that. Let me see here. Okay, so all right, so we said in the long run, all costs are variable. In the short run, fixed costs are fixed. Now, what differentiates, or what is the delineation? Where's the line that we cross where a fixed cost now changes? In other words, it tends to take a jump or a step upward. We say that if inputs create costs, then fixed inputs create fixed costs. And so if those inputs change, it's wherever the inputs change that requires an investment in maybe new equipment, new facilities, maybe even new managers. And these are discrete and they're lumpy, and they take a jump or a step upward, because you can't add a 10th of a factory or a 5th of a manager or something like that. So in the short run, they're fixed, but in the long run, all costs are variable. Okay. Any questions so far? All right. Then there's a number of questions dealing with market structure, and it is an important part of this class. It ties in directly to a lot of what you'll be seeing for those of you who want to study for the business classes, but if not, it's still important information regarding how firms operate. One of those is the distinction between perfect competition and monopoly. So we talk a lot in this course about the distinction between these four types of structures: perfect competition, monopoly, which we said we sort of described as being polar opposites of one another, North Pole, South Pole, and almost every characteristic, with the exception of maximizing profit, almost every characteristic of perfect competition is pretty much flipped around when it comes to monopoly. Okay, and including those is a perfectly competitive firm is a price taker, monopoly is a price maker, price taking and price making. So firms in perfect competition have no ability to influence the price of the good, so they simply take the price that's given and they have nothing to say about it. The only decision really, as relates to the PQ decision, is about quantity. How much do we produce? That's really the only decision there. Okay? Also, you want to know about, in perfect competition, we talked about the shutdown point. So the shutdown point was the point at which price equals average variable cost. And I know that sounds a little bit odd and maybe not even correct a little bit, because it's like, well, why, if we're losing money, in fact, we're below the break-even point. The break-even point is simply where the price equals average total cost. We're simply saying, okay, we're going to say price equals average variable cost, because above that, at least they're covering their labor costs, their materials costs. They're keeping the doors open. They're keeping the lights on. But if you can't do that, then you reach the shutdown point. So where price equals average variable cost is the shutdown point. And that's where a firm will shut down. Typically, it's where any firm will shut down, but we typically describe it more in the perfectly competitive structure, because shutdown is a very common feature. Remember, in perfect competition, we said the failure rate is very high. We said that in the long run, economic profit is expected to be zero. Expected to be zero. Not accounting profit. They can still earn accounting profit, but economic profit is probably zero. Okay. Okay, just know about the other characteristics of perfect competition. Identical products, they can't, there's no product differentiation, there's no economic profit in the long run, that sort of thing. The goods are what we call commoditized goods. Okay, so, okay, let me see here. Okay, all right, so we talked about monopolies and we said, okay, monopolies are bad because, and so what is the because, what's the fill in the blank issue? There are really three things that monopolies do that are bad. Number one, they have higher prices than perfect competition. Two, they produce lower outputs. Three, they create dead weight losses. So all those are bad things. And I guess you could say a fourth, but it's sort of related to the first one. It's the idea of reduction in consumer surplus. We talked about consumer surpluses being this value that consumers get from consuming goods. And so, but that's sort of implied in really the first two, actually. Higher prices, lower outputs, dead weight loss. So what are dead weight losses? They're simply this creation of a dead zone, hence the term, where there's no value there. It's just simply a vacuum. And so the market would demand more goods, particularly at lower prices, but the supplier refuses to provide them. And that's what monopolies do, is they restrict output, and that's the way they can enforce the monopoly. Okay. Also know about what the definition of monopoly is, that it's a single seller of a good. And how do they maintain their monopoly? They typically erect barriers to entry. Barriers to entry are those things that that prevent any firm from coming into a market for whatever reason. Okay. So barriers to entry, and they can be all kinds of things. And one big one that we talked about here is the idea of cost. Sometimes it's just extremely difficult to enter a market just simply because of the fact it's too darn expensive to get into it. And as a result, monopolies can exist for a long time. And keep in mind that the AT&T monopoly, which was broken up some 40 years ago or so, had been a monopoly for decades, and nobody thought it was ever going to be, challenged. In fact, but the MCI, the founders of MCI figured out a way to do it. Some of it was through legal measures, but to sort of pry open the gates there, because AT&T was considered almost the epitome of a monopoly, but it's a monopoly we allowed to exist because they did a decent job of delivering what we thought was now almost a utility. Telephone was almost considered a utility. But then now, today, that we have plenty of competition within the market for long distance. Now, cell service and internet, and all of this have made it a lot less important than what it used to be. Okay. Okay, let's see here. You want to know about monopolistic competition. So what do we say monopolistic competition was? It's a structure that is mostly defined by the type of product that they offer. Differentiated and often branded products. So therefore, peanut butter is not just peanut butter, it's got to be Jif or Skippy or Peter Pan, right? It's got to be one. And as a result, people tend to gravitate toward brands. And we talked a bit about brands, and for those of you who are interested in marketing, you're going to get way more about brands than what I can offer here. But they're important in the sense that they provide a form of insurance to buyers. They know what they're getting every time. You're not surprised every time you open a jar of mayonnaise. You know what that particular brand, Best Foods mayonnaise, you know exactly what you're getting. Or Kraft salad dressing, there's no surprise. Whereas with a new brand or a generic, you really don't know, and so maybe you get an unpleasant surprise. So, so people are willing to pay up for that, and they know exactly what they're getting, and they like what they're getting, and so it's a fair trade-off. If they didn't like what they're getting, I assume that they wouldn't buy it at all. Okay, so you want to know about that, and also what are some of the examples that we talked about with regard to monopolistic competition? We said that there were things like, and some of them weren't completely obvious. Insurance companies, for instance, heavily branded. People gravitate to an insurance company and stay there. Allstate, they'll stay there for years, and so will their kids and grandkids. Maybe, you know, even hotels, motels are definitely branded, and things like specialty retailers we talked about, like Dippin' Dots and things like that. These are companies that are, whatever they produce, it may be easy to produce, but it's not easy the brand, or Sunglass Hut, or all these very specialized retailers that we see, particularly in like mall locations. They're difficult to reproduce the brand. Starbucks is probably the best example of that. Starbucks just makes coffee. It's not, I could make what Starbucks makes at my house if I wanted to. But, you know, people know exactly what Starbucks does, and people are willing to pay up for Starbucks. But they were an early entrant into the market of big time retail, big box coffee. And so as a result, they got out earlier. And yes, they have competition, but their competition is tiny compared to where they're at. It's monopolistic competition that they're involved in. Okay. So just know what's being asked for there. Okay. When it comes to oligopolies, what is it about oligopolies we should know about? We should know about this idea of what we call collusion. Okay, and collusion is an illegal activity. So we're saying that firms that engage in collusion are violating the law. Collusion is this effort to get together on the supply side and say, okay, let's divide up the market and we'll supply, you know, these states or whatever, and we won't compete against each other, or we'll rig the price upward and we'll agree to have a higher price. That's illegal. That's collusive activity. Instead, what oligopolies practice is a form of unspoken, or what is known as tacit collusion, where they simply sort of lead and follow. And the best example of that's the airline industry, where the price will change and everybody else will change their price. And it's not just that they come close, but they come exactly. And so this is why I said if you're booking a flight on Priceline or Expedia or any of those, that if you're putting the exact, open up to any airline, put in some brand of agenda, the price will be exactly the same all the way across, until you get to different times and dates, and obviously that changes, but even within that, they tend to be exactly the same. And that's what oligopolies do. We have very few competitors. They all watch each other. And so we say that the term you want to know is what's called strategic interdependence. Strategic interdependence is they watch each other, they follow each other, and they find out what works and they go with what works. Another example that I think a lot of us are familiar with is this idea, and I mentioned this a couple times. In football, somebody came up with the yellow line that denoted the first down line. And then so I think Fox did it the first time, and everybody else said, we've got to have that. And so as a result, everybody's got that yellow first down line. If you're in a live game, it's almost distracting not to see it, because you don't know where the first down line is, you know. So everyone's got it. And same goes with cable news. The scroll at the bottom is there. Slow motion, everyone's got slow motion. That was a brand new thing that everyone just sort of had to adopt. That's the idea of leading and following behavior, okay? But know about antitrust. So there's a chapter dedicated to antitrust, which is right after the market structure piece. And It deals with a number of the laws that were passed to try to deal with monopolies. Most important of those being the Sherman Act, which was passed in 1890. That was, and by the way, the term antitrust is simply, it sounds like an old school term now, but it was the fact that corporations were setting up these sort of legal artifices called trusts. And trusts still exist today, but they're not the same thing. But they were sort of corporate shell companies that were owning other companies illegally or maybe semi-illegally. It was, the law wasn't well defined, frankly. And so the Sherman Act prevented monopoly formation. Okay. And the biggest culprit, I think that's probably the right word, at least in the minds of the government, was the Standard Oil Company, which was, and it took another 20 years to actually end up doing what the government ended up doing. It was breaking it up. And then breaking it up didn't really do that much good because the same owners owned pieces of the broken up companies. So now we, in the Clayton Act of 1906, prevented what's called interlocking directorates. Interlocking directorates are those things which prevent people from running a company, running competing companies. You can't sit on the board of one competing company and another also competing company. That's illegal. Okay. So you want to know about the Sherman Act and the Clayton Act and what those are about. Okay. Let me see here. Okay, then we talk about market power. There was a measure that's used, and it was economists probably 100 years ago, I think in the 1920s, called the Herfindahl-Hirschman Index, or the HHI, and it measures market power from 0 to 10,000. So, and it's just simply taking the market shares of all the competing firms in the market, not just the top 4, as the CR4, that's concentration ratio 4 index used. And it simply squares them and adds them up. Okay. By squaring them, you magnify the power of big firms. And why 10,000? 10,000's got to be the max, because if one firm had 100% market share, and no other competitors, 100% market share, 100 squared is 10,000. Okay. So 0 to 10,000, even though it's going to be rare, you can't get 0. It doesn't make any sense. So it's above 0 and up to 10,000. Okay. And then know about externalities. We talked a bit about externalities. They're also called spillovers. And what are they? They are simply unintended and uncompensated effects of some economic activity that affects some other party. The other party we tend to refer to as a bystander. The bystander receives something like pollution. And pollution was the one that we come to a lot in this particular discussion, because there's been more work done in the area of pollution probably than any other. And it's the idea that firms create goods, whatever the goods are, but then maybe it's plastic, but in creating plastic, they also create air pollution, water pollution, groundwater contamination, whatever. And there are all kinds of different measures of contamination based upon what particular chemical is being injected in. I know that in our department, we have an environmental economics class that gets into a lot of these issues. And it's a bit more specific, but we're focusing here on the basics of the externality itself. So what do externalities do? If it's a negative externality, it creates marginal social cost. What is a marginal social cost? Marginal social cost is the added cost to society over and above the private cost of production. It's the cost that's borne by society from some negative externality, whether it's pollution, whether it's criminal conduct, whether it's something like litter, which I guess is pollution, whether it's an unsafe product that damages, that hurts somebody who's not related to good. We talked about dangerous products that children sometimes are hurt by. So this is why there are all kinds of warning labels. It's maybe not so much about injuring adults, but rather injuring children who don't know what they're up against. So those are examples of that. Now, there are positive externalities, and those are goods that create positive benefits over and above the benefit that the private demand side enjoys. And those are things like particular examples would be things like vaccinations. We talked about that a lot. And I know that it's sort of an unfortunate time that we're talking about this because there's so much controversy over vaccinations, but I think the evidence is pretty strong that vaccinations not only improve the health of the person getting it, but more importantly, that they don't spread infectious disease to others. So in other words, they do it for themselves, but they get a positive spillover. College education is considered a direct positive spillover. And by the way, if there's a government solution to that, a positive externality, is to subsidize it. In fact, in both of the examples that I gave, government is very heavily involved in subsidizing both of those. And in terms of what to do about the negative externalities, government can choose to tax it, what we call a Pigovian tax. Remember that term, Pigovian tax? based upon the work of Cecil Pigot, and it's the idea that we tax things. We tax the creator of the negative externalities so as to internalize the externality, make that polluter pay, in other words. But there are also some market-based tools we talked about. And one of those was the pollution permits, pollution rights, in other words. And so remember we talked about this. This was the idea that government sets a cap. It's more informally known as the cap and trade system. Government sets a cap on the total amount of pollution that can exist for a particular chemical, let's say arsenic, that's produced as a byproduct of producing whatever it is producers are making. So as a result, if those who use arsenic and produce it, that are issued permit rights, and if they can lower their own pollution, then they can sell their unused pollution credit to somebody else who's much less efficient. But the idea is that everyone's got an incentive to reduce their amount of pollution, particularly since that cap is supposed to come down over time. Maybe never to zero, but it's going to come down. That's one way of controlling pollution, is a market-oriented solution to that. Okay, so market-oriented tools are intended to do that, and it's to create both flexibility and also this idea of creating options for people. Okay, so it creates options. It's flexibility, and also it creates an incentive for firms to not pollute as much. Okay. And it tends to be where the more efficient producer tends to be the ones that tend to sell these, that tend to lower their emissions and sell those off. Okay. Any questions so far about anything? Okay, we talked about, I just mentioned a minute ago, natural monopoly. So what is a natural monopoly? A natural monopoly is a monopoly that exists and that is tolerated because it's called natural because there's no real way for any firm to come in and compete against it. The economics of it don't make sense, and as a result, we allow natural monopolies to exist. And the best examples, if we said monopolies are mostly local phenomena anyway, well, these are truly local. These are gas utilities, electric utilities, water utilities that tend to have a monopoly on what they do. They tend not to have competition. And the reason why is because it's just too darn expensive to get into a market. There was nobody who'd want to be involved in going up against P&M or anybody in any local market I can think of. And I know there are examples of cases which towns have grown together, and we're now we've got a bit of the ambiguity, but that still doesn't negate the idea of structure. And my cousin works for an electric utility that is a rural electric co-op, and they are now growing into the urban areas. And so now there's a big debate over who gets to service the new construction. So it does happen. So, but they tend to be electric, natural gas, etc. There's also a question about tax incidence. The tax incidence is this term to describe who pays the tax who pays a goods tax. So in other words, and there are a lot of goods that sort of beg to be taxed, if you like. Goods like cigarettes, alcohol, gasoline, and sometimes they're called sin taxes. And that's sort of I almost don't like that term because it sort of implies that people are up to no good or trying to degrade people in something. And gasoline is not particularly sinful, I guess, but we all have to use it. But nonetheless, they're taxes on specific goods that are identified specifically. The question is who pays them, and who pays the tax generally is the demand side, because the demand side tends to be much more price inelastic. Hence, they're not sensitive to the increase in price due to the tax. We talked a bit about this as well. I think the idea that the demand side is much less effective at being to the supply side. The supply side can push it off onto the demand side, which is why the tax for things like gasoline, alcohol, and cigarettes go up and up and up and up, and the price of those are only going in one direction over time. Okay. Okay, and then there are a couple examples that you want to know about of positive and negative externalities. I think I went over some of those, and so just kind of you can refer back to either the PowerPoints or our notes on that. You can refer to that. Just what are some examples? Pollution obviously being an obvious negative, vaccination being an obviously positive. There's a question dealing with asymmetric information. Okay, and oh, by the way, I should mention, somebody pointed out on the fourth exam there was an error, and it's my error, frankly, and it has to deal with asymmetric versus imperfect information. And for whatever reason, I entered the wrong answer. So I'm going to go back and correct that. I will do that. I made a note to do it. I haven't done it yet because we've still got 3 people taking the makeup of exam 4. it's just easier to go in and do it all at once, so I don't lose my place and whatnot. So, that is coming. And so you'll see if you missed it, your score will be adjusted upward. But anyway, back to asymmetric information is where there's unequal amounts of information, and that's more difficult than imperfect information. Imperfect information can be held by both sides of the transaction, and it's either wrong information, incomplete information, outdated information. But asymmetric information is where somebody has an advantage of the transaction because they know more than another party. Okay, they know more about the particular good that's being sold than the other party does. They know more about what the price ought to be than the other party does, and so as a result, this is where risk enters the picture. And we define risk as the uncertainty of an outcome, or the degree of uncertainty of an outcome. So the more uncertain something is, the more risky it is. I know that sometimes people view the term risk as being synonymous with loss, but it can also be also associated with gain. That is, we can sometimes get unknown, but nonetheless positive outcomes. And so risk is simply defined as the uncertainty of an outcome. Okay, we also talked a bit about, there's an international piece. I think it was the very last chapter that dealt with international. Whereas we talked about free trade and efforts on the part of government sometimes to subvert free trade through tariffs, quotas, special licensing, inspections, and whatnot. What are tariffs? Tariffs are taxes on imports, and they usually are paid by the buyers themselves, the consumers themselves, even though there are direct taxes levied on the importers, that is the firms importing the good from somewhere else, but they often are passed along to the buyer if there's demand for the good. And so tariffs are one way, and they're particularly used to, I guess, protect against imported goods, protecting domestic producers from the competitive effects of imported goods. Okay, so tariffs, quotas are simply restrictions on goods that are put in. So if the government says, okay, we're going to only allow X number of tons of per year, whatever that is, whatever it is, we're going to limit that. And so as a result, we want to protect domestic producers or steel. And sometimes there are legitimate reasons. I know a few years ago, the South Korean steel producers overproduced steel, so then they were simply trying to get rid of it by undercutting domestic producers. And domestic producers say, look, it's not our fault they overproduced. Protect us from this cheap steel that they just want to dump on our market. So that's an example of a quota in that regard. Okay. And there are a couple of questions dealing with price controls, price ceiling, price floor. Okay. So a price ceiling is simply a restriction on the price of a good. It's set below the price. So think about ceilings not being up there, but being low, and that is restricting the price, making it lower than the equilibrium price. Typically, when there's a price ceiling that results in a shortage. Okay. And ceilings, and the classic example, one that we talked about in class was rent ceilings or rent control housing, where these rents are controlled at a level, and they usually are fixed. They're a little bit more complicated than what we described in class, but nonetheless, the idea is that it contributes to a supply shortage, a shortage of housing. So as a result, that's what a ceiling. A price floor, on the other hand, puts the price up here, so above the equilibrium price or the market price. So don't think about a floor being down here, but think about it being up there. That is the idea that a price floor creates a surplus because it creates more incentive to provide more output, and it's also called a price support. And one of those that we talked about in class that's a very sort of controversial topic when it comes to that is the minimum wage. And the minimum wage is considered to be an example of a price floor where government decrees that the wage be above a certain level so as to maintain some sort of minimum for any worker. But why it's controversial is because of the fact that not that many working adults earn the minimum wage, because the minimum wage at the federal level, I know it's higher at the state, in New Mexico state level, but it's around, I think, $7.25 per hour. And that's really not a wage that would even be competitive in today's labor market. So, but for whatever reason, that minimum wage is almost irrelevant at the federal level because the federal government changes it so infrequently. I mean, it was just a few years ago that it was in 3s or 4s. I think it was like $4.75 for the longest time. Didn't move, and very few people, except for the least skilled and most part-time itinerant workers, would earn anything like that. And so as a result, a lot of people say minimum wage has sort of lost its sort of oomph. So states really are taking the lead here. New Mexico clearly being one of those with efforts to sort of raise that minimum wage. But that's an example of price floor that we would specifically call it wage floor. Okay, and then know about what barriers to entry are. What are some examples of barriers to entry? We talked about this idea of barriers to entry is anything which prevent on the supply side new entrants from coming in and competing against existing competitors. Cost was one that I mentioned a minute ago, but also there could be things like legal issues. You've got to get a license in order to enter a particular market. So in certain areas, I can't speak to Albuquerque necessarily, but in some areas, the right to sell liquor on a retail basis means you have to have a liquor license. In some areas, they are very much fixed in nature. And so these were like almost like licenses to print money. There was a friend of mine whose parents had a liquor license, and both of them died fairly early. They passed it along to him, and he didn't really want to run a liquor store, but he said, well, I got to have somebody to run it because it's a liquor license, and and they're valuable. And so you get the idea. Those are barriers. Those prevent new entrants from coming into a market. Also, things like licensing of occupations that limit the number of people who can become realtors or accountants or whatever. Okay, positions. Obviously, a lot of discussion of that. So, okay, so I think that I've covered everything that is going to be on the exam. I can answer any questions you've got. I'll go over any graphical examples you want me to cover. Anybody on the Zoom call or anybody certainly here. We've got a little bit of time, about 15 minutes or so left over. So any questions I can answer for anybody? Okay, I guess not. Well, all right, well, I'm around again, as I say all the time, I'm here. So if you do have questions, get with me. I'll try to make this available as early as I can. I know that your time is limited, particularly during finals week, so I want to make this available as early as possible. It'll be available no later than tomorrow, if you want. And I've just got a few adjustments I want to make, but they'll be available. If you have questions, run into difficulties, give me a call. You can leave me a voicemail, you can send me an email. Email is good because I can pick you up on my phone wherever I am, and I can get back to you. Make sure I know if you do send me an email, make sure I know what class you're in. I know people are always saying, hey, this is so-and-so, and I'm in, but they don't tell me what class they're in, so I don't really know where to go find what's going on. So just tell me that. And if you want me to call you, give me a telephone number, and I'll call you back. And we'll try to work through it. Okay. All right. Well, it was great having you all in class, and I wish everybody good luck on the exam. And I will hopefully see you around campus at some point. So have a great rest of your day and have a good summer. Okay.